Market equilibrium. A market is in equilibrium when supply equals demand. At equilibrium, price and output are stable. There's a balance in the market and the supply is equal to demand. All products that are presented for sale are sold and the market is cleared. In a free market, supply and demand determines the equilibrium price and quantity. This free interaction of supply and demand is known as market forces. The equilibrium point can be found at the point where the supply curve and the demand curve meet. We're going to see this now on the screen. The table shows the supply and demand for a teddy bear at various prices. By looking at the data in this table, you can see that the equilibrium price is £40. And it's £40 because the units demanded, 4,000, are exactly equal to the quantity supplied. And this can be reflected on the diagram. Here, the equilibrium price and quantity are established once more at £40 and it's equal to 4,000 units. When a market is cleared, the amount sellers wish to sell is equal to the amount what buyers demand. Here, the market has cleared. When supply and demand aren't equal, the market is in disequilibrium. If there's excess supply or excess demand, the market will be in disequilibrium. Excess supply and demand won't exist in a free market for long. Market forces act to remove the excess supply or demand. So, excess supply. Excess supply is when the quantity supplied to the market is greater than the quantity demanded. So, you can see in this example, at a price of £60, the quantity supplied is 6,000 teddy bears, but only 2,000 teddy bears are demanded. There is an excess demand of 4,000 between this point. 4,000 teddy bears. So, if the teddy bear is set above the equilibrium price, so in our example £60, there's an surplus, another way of saying excess supply of 4,000 units. What's going to happen is that this price cannot stay there. So what's going to happen here, there's my excess supply, and because of the price being too high, what's going to happen, the price is going to have to be reduced to 40. Remember, that's our clearing price from the earlier example. So there will be a contraction in supply. Look, from that point here to here. Oh, change the colour back. You can see that there's going to be a contraction in supply. So supply will reduce. Also, as the price falls from 60 to 40, there will be an extension in demand. So this movement along the demand curve here. So that will take us eventually to £40 per teddy bear, the market clearing price. Excess demand. Excess demand is when the demand for a good or service is greater than the supply. So here we can see that the demand, let's straight that first, the excess demand. The demand is 6,000 teddy bears, but in this case only 2,000 are being supplied. I know 2,000 are being supplied because I find the supply curve, which is this one. I'll just remove that, it's a little confusing, but that will be the quantity supplied. This is my demand curve, and that will be the quantity here that's demanded at a price of £20. So what will happen, obviously we cannot stay at this price. The price is too low and there is excess demand. So what's going to happen? The market will see prices rise to clear this excess demand. So eventually what's going to happen, prices will be bid up. So they'll go up from 20 to say 25 to 30, and as prices go up there will be a contraction in demand. So demand will fall from 6 to 4,000 as the price goes up to 40. But look what has happened as well on the other side. There is going to be an extension in supply. And the reason there's going to be an extension in supply is because the providers of the teddy bears can now charge £40 as opposed to £20. So they're willing to supply an extra 2,000 units. The combination of a falling demand of 2,000 units from the consumer and an extension of supply by the producer of 2,000 units means that we clear the excess demand of £4,000, but only at a price of £40, our market clearing price. Shifts in demand and supply curves will change the market equilibrium. If the demand curve shifts, assuming no changes in the supply curve, then this will affect supply and price in the following ways. So, if demand increases from D to D1, then the price will increase from PE to P1, and supply will see an extension from QE to Q1, creating a new equilibrium. So it's important you phrase it in this way. So you might want to pause the video now and jot that down word for word. So I'll repeat one more time. If demand increases from D to D1, the price will increase from PE to P1, and supply will extend from QE to Q1, creating a new equilibrium. Conversely, if demand decreases from D to D2, then the price will fall to P2 and supply will contract to Q2, again creating a new equilibrium. If the supply curve, assuming no change in the demand curve, shifts, this will affect demand and supply in the following ways. Well, first, if the supply increases from S to S1, then the price will fall to P1 and there will be an extension in demand to Q1, creating a new equilibrium. Again, you need to learn that word for word, so I would jot that down. If the supply decreases from S to S2, then the price will rise to P2 and demand will contract to Q2, again creating a new equilibrium. So you can see, look, one more time. Oh, on here. Just add the pen. You can see that as the S2, look, S has gone to S2, the supply shifts. But when I'm talking about extension or contraction, remember that I'm talking about as the supply curve shifts, there's a movement along this curve. That movement is the contraction. When supply was shifting to the right, there was a extension in demand. When supply was shifting to the left, there was a contraction in demand. Elasticity will affect the point of the new equilibrium. Price elasticity of supply and the price elasticity of demand influence the size of changes in the equilibrium price and quantities caused by supply and demand curve shifts. For example, if the demand curve shifts to the right along an elastic supply curve, this will have a larger effect on quantity than price. The opposite is true for an inelastic supply curve. So I'll draw that now on a diagram to illustrate this point. Okay, so you see supply is elastic here. Now what you can see, if I mark the equilibriums on, Q1, P1, Q2, P2, you can see that the quantity increases massively, but there's a fairly small shift in price. Let's illustrate that clearly. So you can see that's much smaller. Oh, technical error. Than this distance. So when supply is elastic, the extension in demand between Q1 and Q2 will be much larger than if supply was inelastic. So let's draw a really steep curve here. So that's supply inelastic as opposed to elastic here. And you can see when I mark the equilibriums on, Q1, Q2, P1, P2, that the change in price is massive compared to the increase in demand when supply is inelastic. So supply inelastic means a big increase in price. With supply elastic, it's a big increase in quantity. I would now draw the same diagram, a similar diagram, but instead of having demand shift to the right, I would have supply shifting to the right and contrast demand inelastic with demand elastic. So repeat, one demand curve on each, two supply curves shift on each diagram, and you're going to replicate what I've drawn here. Okay, so when you replicate that, you should find then if when it was demand inelastic again, if it was demand inelastic, there'll be a huge increase in price. So if your supply curve, for instance, shifted from S1 to S2 on the diagram you sketched yourself, you'll have found that there's a huge increase in price, relatively small change in quantity. With the one with the demand elastic curve, you would have found when the supply curve shifts, say to the left, there was a huge impact on the quantity, but price only increased slightly. The demand and supply model involves several assumptions. The demand and supply model involves, as I say, several assumptions. For example, it's assumed that supply and demand are independent of each other. In other words, the reasons that shift the demand curve are separate for the reasons that shift the supply curve. Ceteris paribus applies. Remember, that's where all things being held equal. So if we say that income is increased, we obviously assume that demand is shifted to the right, but what's held constant is the idea that there's no changes to tax, for example. There's no changes to taste and fashion. We assume all markets are perfectly competitive. That is, market forces, demand and supply determine solely prices. These assumptions mean the model has limited use in the real world. However, the model can be useful as it gives a broad picture of how supply and demand works in a way that's simple and easy to understand.